Hey, what's up, gardening friends? How's everybody doing? Well, that's a mess, just like me. Seems like the appropriate tone to set low expectations. How's everybody doing? I hope you're good. I am great. I forgot to put the plant on the table. Always coming prepared, right? There's actually a couple of plants I want to talk about. They're the same plant. I just have two of them. So I don't really have room to make this work, do I? This is Phlebodium aureum, or the Blue Star Fern. Well, Blue Star Fern is actually a variety of the Phlebodium aureum. This is just the regular Phlebodium aureum. The Blue Star tends to have thicker ends on the leaves, more like I don't know how to describe it, like a paw shape or a pad shape, whereas these have very much a pinnate shape, more of a typical frond type of foliage. Frond type, fern type of foliage on them. I might go ahead and pull you out of here real quick. Put this big guy back here so we can get that into frame. There we go. Or at least, well, kind of. Alright, so what's special about this fern? Why did I want to talk about it? Well, for one, I need to do some work on mine. Looking kind of sad. What happened here with mine is I put it in a different location this winter when I brought it inside, and I wasn't really able to get the water to it like I would prefer to. So it, suffered a little bit. I'm going to go in here, trim out some of this dead foliage. I'll talk about repotting and the nuances kind of that go along with that, but I'm not actually going to do it. One, because I don't have a basket quite large. We'll get to all that. But let's start with the basics. Phlebodium aureum. This is an epiphytic fern from South America, grows in the trees. So all that means is it's a fern that doesn't need soil. Doesn't mean it can't be grown in soil, but that it typically, that's not what it's naturally grown in. This is a shade-loving plant, as are many epiphytes, and it's hardy zones 9 through 11. So not one that likes much cold, but can take more cold than other like truly tropical ferns. So the foliage on here, a glaucous bluish gray color that's, usually referred to as green. I see color a little bit differently. To me, this looks very blue. Who knows how it's going to look when I'm in editing and everything, but that's, to me, one of the things that's always been so cool. And it must also be seen as blues to a lot of people, since it's called the Blue Star Fern, at least the variety with the thicker foliages. The Phlebodium aureum only gets about a foot high, a little bit taller than that. I'd say more like 18 to 20 inches. There are different varieties, so there can be some variations in the size, and 2 to 3 feet wide. They spread by runners, which I don't think are going to show on camera, partially because this is very, very, very full of pine needles, but really, with that type of growth, they can grow somewhat indefinitely, especially if you make sure to cut those rhizomes. It'll keep bushing out and keep spreading. What I really wanted to talk about here was actually indoor care for this plant and some of the nuances when it comes to watering and potting. So just for time's sake, because I need to soak mine very, very heavily right now, so I'm going to go ahead and do that and talk about watering, skip over a few little details, and get back to those in a minute. Usually I leave watering for last. I don't know that anybody cares, but that's just what I'm talking about. When watering the Phlebodium aureum, they tend to rot fairly easily if they get too much water in the centers and these crowns in here where those new growths are. That's kind of hard to avoid though. It's really tricky to avoid getting water into those, especially when it's under potted. And like mine is under potted. You can see how the soil's mounding up in here. It's because I need to repot it. So one of the safest ways to water these, see how the water's running right out of there? Not very productive. That's why I have this in a dish so it can soak some water up from the bottom. But it helps to go ahead and try and water around the edge of everything and not directly into the center. That's actually something that's true of most ferns. You don't really, if you're growing them as a house plant, it's best to avoid pouring water directly into the crown of the plant, into the center. Because like I said, that's when you start to have rot. Unless you have really great airflow, even then, it's best to go ahead and avoid that. All right, there we go. So the fern is soaking. Typically, this is not the best way to water it. I've been out of town for several days, so it got very, very dry. Some of the foliage started to dry out and brown, as you can see here. So that's why I'm giving it a heavy soak instead of just a traditional watering. And then to clean up the old foliage in these guys, usually you can just pull it right out if it's old enough. But most people don't want to leave it around long enough for it to get old enough to pull right out. So I'm just using a clean pair of stainless steel scissors. That doesn't really matter what you use as long as it's sterile. Just gonna cut that stuff out of there. And some of the damaged foliage on mine is also because it went through, we had an unexpected freeze. I keep talking about that in all my videos back in October. And so it did end up having a little bit of frost damage. So that took out some of the fronds as well. This leaf actually not so bad, but I'm gonna go ahead and take it out just because I may as well if I'm cleaning it up, right? Okay, so I've gotten all the stuff cleaned out and get a better view now of everything going on down here in the pot. as well as just with the rest of the plant in general. Now, this is by no means like a shining specimen of a fern, particularly just because I had to cut out all that foliage. It lost some foliage very quickly. The reason it lost that foliage quickly is because they don't like to dry out for a long time, and I was gone for several days, and I thought it would be okay with the lights dimmed and the heaters turned down and everything, but yeah, not so much. That's alright. This is a forgiving plant. A much more forgiving fern than a lot of ferns that are commonly grown as houseplants. In the house, these guys are very, very, very simple. They are a low light plant. They do not need much light at all. In fact, if you give them too much light, they will scorch and burn. You can put them in a room that just gets like some ambient light through a window, maybe a northeast window, something like that. As long as the sun's not on it, it'll be okay. I mean, like beaming, burning directly onto the foliage. As with all ferns, I keep mentioning that moist soil, so keeping it away from drafts or anything that's going to dry it out is always a good idea. Ferns are also very tender when it comes to fertilizing, so you go probably half strength to quarter strength on your fertilizing, monthly to every other month. If you notice that the foliage is very dull, maybe make sure you have something that has a chelated iron, something like that in there. Fish fertilizers always seem to work great with them as well. Just again, don't go too strong because their roots will burn. Very delicate little roots. Speaking of the roots and what's going on down in these pots, when it comes to potting these up, the reason I'm not repotting mine now is because it's really just not the right time of year for it. Even though the space I'm using, my grow room, is climate controlled and I can adjust the lighting and everything, I still just don't want to stress it out, because if you tear the roots up too much on these guys and repot them when they're not in active growth, when they're not in their active growth that they would be in the way of like summertime when there's longer day lengths and more moisture around them, for me, because I keep mine outside, then they're going to be more prone to rot. It isn't always the best idea to soak them, but desperate times, desperate measures. This isn't something I would normally do. I'm just trying to get the medium in there rehydrated. The reason it's not always a great idea to soak is because water fills in the gaps that are in there and you lose oxygen around the roots, and then rot can happen. It's not always the best thing. As far as their potting medium is concerned, the majority of the information out there when you get online and try and read up on how to repot these guys, a lot of it says to use something like an orchid bark, because they are actually, I mean, they're epiphytic, so that makes some sense. The problem, however, with that is that if you pick this up from a big box store, odds are it's in a potting soil. It's probably not planted up in orchid bark. And epiphytes, their roots are pretty adaptable, so it's not unusual for them to go through a shock if you take them from soil into a bark mixture. They start to drop their leaves and just overall look very unhappy. It can take quite a while to get them accustomed to being in bark. Myself personally, when I repot mine, I'll probably go 60-40, being 60% all-purpose potting soil. I'll add some perlite to it, and then the rest will be orchid bark. I'll probably use a bark that has some the charcoal and maybe a little bit of the sphagnum in there. I prefer it doesn't have the sphagnum, just because that will break down even faster and can hold on to too much moisture. They're really forgiving. These, I had one of these many years ago as a child when I first was getting into plants, and it lost all of its foliage. I didn't know what I was doing. You couldn't just get onto like Google and figure out how to take care of these things. It wasn't in any of my books, and it was just labeled as a fern. Actually, I think it was labeled as a staghorn fern, which I now know that it was not a staghorn fern. But anyways, it lost all of its foliage because I wasn't watering it anywhere near enough. And then I started watering it more and more, and boom, popped right back, did fine, had it for several more years. Another reason I'm not repotting this right now is because, as I mentioned, the only other baskets I have around are like 10 or 12 inches. That's too big. You only want to go about, I'd say, 1.5 inches to 2.5 inches at the absolute max outside diameter when potting up a plant, just because it's not going to be able to get to the moisture very well when you water it. If I lived someplace, say like Florida, where I could keep this outside all year and the weather was very humid, the air had lots of moisture in it, then a coconut lined basket would work great for this. I wouldn't be as concerned about the potting medium with nice wet air. My winter air is bone dry, and then probably I'd say May through September, pretty humid, but the rest of the year it's pretty dry here. And that's why I'm not going to go pure orchid bark with it. The bark's just not going to hold on to moisture long enough for it in a drier climate. And I think that that's more applicable to a lot of people, because if this is being kept as a if this is being kept as a house plant, odds are that indoors is a little bit drier. Because, you know, running ACs and heaters and whatnot dries the air out. There we go. I've gone in and switched over to my smaller one. Oh no, was my fan on for everything I've been doing? I'm so sorry. That thing can be very loud. It got really hot in the grow room today, like lower 90s, which is totally unnecessary. It doesn't need to be that warm. So my fans were all running, trying to cool things off. And you can see here with the smaller guy, I had mine hanging up outside in my pine trees over the summertime, which maybe in hindsight wasn't the best idea because now they are full of pine needles. And I've been slowly going through and trying to pull them out. It's supposed to be fairly breezy tomorrow, so I actually may take it outside, turn it upside down, and give it a good shake and just kind of let the wind take those away. As with most tropicals, particularly epiphytes in general, they like a more acidic soil to even neutral. Pine needles, those can break down and make things kind of alkaline, so it's important that I get those out of there and not let them build up too much. It does take them a while to break down though, so it's not something I'm really concerned about. Overall, these are super awesome, easy plants. The foliage is beautiful, the plants are pretty easy to take care of, especially as far as a fern is concerned. Ferns give people a lot of trouble in the house. I do make sure when these have been watered that water's not sitting in those drainage dishes. In fact, you can snap those right off. I don't bother with that just because I have trouble keeping them properly hydrated in the wintertime because the air is so dry. This year is better than other years. My humidity is averaging around 53 to 55%, somewhere in there. But even still, like, that's not super humid for an epiphyte. You know, think about it in nature down in South America. These guys are growing up in the trees. Their roots are on the trunks of the trees growing across the bark, and they're exposed to that moist air. It's very humid. Not so much, you know, inside in a grow space though. That way when I water them, I can let them sit with their drainage dish with some water for a little while, make sure I dump them out before like nighttime comes around. And they do well in a dimly lit room, which is hard to find with a lot of plants. The foliage is very interesting. I think it has an awesome texture to it. When I repot mine, I'm probably going to be potting them up to a lined ball shaped basket because I want them to grow all the way around. Their roots will start to spread and grow all the way around that moss covered figure that I'm going to be putting them on. So it'll be like a big ball of fern. It'll look really cool, but it's just not the right time of year for it. I don't think I can keep it hydrated enough with that type of repotting, but it's a common plant, an easy plant. Go get one. Whenever I know somebody really likes ferns, but maybe is struggling with them, this is one I always recommend, in part because of that forgiving nature like I mentioned. Now, this one specifically, this much smaller one, I got this guy on clearance for $2, and I think they actually marked it down another $1 for me. When I got this one, it only had like maybe 2 or 3 healthy fronds on it. The rest of them were all dried up and desiccated. And that was just like maybe 6 to 8 months ago. It's filled out very, very, very nicely since then. When it's time to repot these guys, I'll make sure to do a video on that with what I decide to do. Also, when I was talking about the potting medium, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying you shouldn't use an orchid bark. I'm saying if it ain't broke, don't fix it. If it looks like it's not in pure orchid bark, then I probably wouldn't use pure orchid bark when repotting it unless I'd been having a lot of troubles keeping the plant hydrated. You know, if the plant's having trouble staying hydrated when the leaves start to brown and fall out. What I just did with the previous one that was up here, the big one, that was a desiccated plant. Too much water and the fronds will start to yellow, rot away. Alright, I think that pretty much covers everything. Just wanted to have a chat about these guys while I was watering them. I realized I had never talked about them before, which was sort of silly because they're such an awesome plant, such a great plant for indoors. Especially if you don't have really sunny windows to put your plants in. This is a really great plant to have around in a house that doesn't have a ton of sunlight. I'm pretty sure these are also listed with the clean air plants, but I'm not positive. Most ferns are. I think you would probably need quite a few of them to make a difference, but still, it's always good to know those things. What have your experiences been with this fern? Comment down below, let me know. This and the kangaroo paw, kangaroo foot fern, which is very similar to this one. Those are probably some of my favorite as far as ferns for hanging baskets that go indoors. And I'll be doing a video on that one too, because I also need to do some work with that fern as well. I hope everybody's doing well. I have all my social media linked down below, down there in the roots of the video. Follow me and I'll follow you back. I'm on Instagram more than anything, at Tropical Plant Party. Love seeing everybody's pictures and what everybody's got going on in their gardens. And don't forget to leave the video a thumbs up. It helps a ton, helps the channel, lets me know I've been doing a great job. I really do appreciate it, so thank you very, very, very much for doing so. And if you haven't already, you'd like to, subscribe as well. I upload multiple times a week, and don't forget to hit that notification bell. That way you know when new videos come out. Alright, that's enough blabbing. Hope everybody's doing well. As always, and most importantly, everybody, keep on growing. Bye-bye.